It's Maz along with the voice of the Riders, Dave Thomas, and normally on Tuesdays and Thursdays, Glen Suitor is on with us just after 5, but because he's traveling to Edmonton to get ready to do the game tomorrow between the Argos and the Elks, we catch him now. So, Suits, we just had Charleston Hughes on, and we mentioned the name Roland Milligan Jr., and then he said back, he called him Roland Mulligan, and then he said it again a second time, and we're like, hold on, you're saying Mulligan, his name's Milligan. He goes, oh no, Mulligan, that's my nickname. That's my nickname for him. So...
Well, I don't understand the nickname, though. Like,
I know.
Mulligan, if I remember correctly, was when you duffed one off the tee and then picked it up and re-teed it up. That was a mulligan.
He said there's been no mulligans from number 0 this year. If anything, he is birdieing and eagling every hole on the golf course, if you ask a lot of the CFL people in the know.
Maybe it's because he's bailing the offense out and giving them a second try.
Oh, look at Colson coming in there, dropping some knowledge.
For the offense. I like it. Okay. Are we sure that Charleston thought, that deeply into it, or did he?
Well, here let's also add on to this. We asked him what he's going to be for Halloween. He said he wants to be the blow up the cowboy with the blow up dinosaur that you wear around your waist. He's got his eye on that for this year for Halloween.
Wow. Awesome. Where is he going? Not trick-or-treating. Tell me he's not going trick-or-treating.
We didn't. Hey, listen, it's not for us to judge, and we didn't get into that. You're on your way to Edmonton, where the Elks will take on the Argos tomorrow. Toronto has looked like one of, if not the, outside of the Riders, the best team in the CFL lately. In your estimation, is it because that defense has come together and that D-line has become dominant and stopping the run, whoever they're playing?
Yeah, that's a big reason for it. But, I also think it's very tough to judge, the best team in the league in these last sort of 3 weeks, because every team is facing sort of a different scenario. The Argos are resting players in Edmonton because they know where they are in the playoffs, and Edmonton's not in the playoffs, so they're auditioning other players. Calgary's going to audition some players and go through rotations in Saskatchewan, although they would love to be sort of spoiler if the Bombers don't win in that previous game, so in the game before the Rider game. So I think it's a little tough to sort of look at the landscape and say, Toronto's the best team in the league in the last 2 weeks, or they're the hottest team. But you're right, though. Their improvement, to me, has been stopping the run, defense first, like physical at the line of scrimmage. Arimolade is one of the best rush ends in the league, doesn't get talked about near enough. And I think Wynton McManus is one of the best linebackers. Him, Jameer Thurman, Nick Anderson in Edmonton, those are your top 3 in my mind. And maybe Darnell Sankey in Montreal. So, I think they've got the leadership, they've got the physicality on both offense and defense. But your thought about can they stop the run, to me, if you take the 2 top teams, or you take in the West anyway, you take the top team in the West, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers right now. I said 2 weeks ago that I think the Riders have really closed the gap on them, but they are still the top team. And one of the reasons for that is their physicality at the line of scrimmage, especially this time of year. So they run the ball well offensively. And defense, think back about, 3-4 weeks ago, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers allowed Nathan Rourke just 2 first downs in an entire game. I mean, I've never seen that in my time in football as a player or as an analyst. Never. Just, 2 or 3 first downs in an entire game. That is not even remotely possible, I thought. So anyway, that's how good the Bomber defense can be. I think the Montreal defense has that capability. And as you mentioned, with Roland and those guys, that group can get it done too. I'm not sure they're top ranked just yet, but they certainly can get it done.
Glen Suitor, I totally understand what you're saying when it comes to the difficulty in making assessments on teams late in the season. But I'm going to send a shout out to Ron from Moose Jaw, who stopped me outside practice back on Tuesday.
Uh-oh.
And he asked me about the week. And I said, I'm intrigued by this week with all the ramifications. And he says, what are you talking about? There's only one standing spot available. I'm like, no. There's ramifications moving forward because players, teams, franchises have a lot to prove, and some need to really take a step ahead. So in your estimation, who's got the most to prove this week, whether it's standings related or not?
Well, you're right about that, Dave, is that the thought that they don't mean anything. And I'm not a fan of that term at all. Like, a game doesn't mean anything, because it always means something, because this is their livelihoods. So, you're not going to go to any day at work and just sort of mail it in, or you might not be working at that place any longer. And that's how you put food on the table. So they always mean something. But as far as your question on who has more to prove, I think you can go down the line and individuals. I mean, I had a chance to talk just recently because I'm doing the Calgary game with Jake Mayer, and Jake is going to start that game, it looks like. And, I asked him about how his season went, things like that. And he said, I want to finish on a strong note. He loves playing in Saskatchewan, so he's looking forward to that. But he said, I want to finish on a strong note so I just feel better in the off season and I can restart for no matter what happens next year. Already the doubt in his mind is coming up about whether or not he'll be back in Calgary. And I think we could all say, it's totally up in the air for everybody in Calgary, the way their season went. So when you think of examples like that, like how many players are trying to prove to the entire league that they're worth investing in? Trey Ford in Edmonton. He wants to go out and rip it up so that either the Elks or another team in the league says, okay, you know what? You've done enough as a backup that we believe you can be a franchise player. And you don't think for a second that every snap Trey Ford takes, he wants to show the rest of the league and his own team right now that he's worth that investment? Of course he is. So there's a lot of that going on for the teams that aren't in the playoffs. I think the trickiest situation for any team really is Montreal. They've gone 3 or 4 weeks now knowing they're in first place. Mm-hmm. And that is a really tricky balancing act. And I don't care how hard you try, and we can say they're professionals and they have to play hard every time. If that's the case, I'll ask you guys a question. Why is it that NHL hockey players don't play their hardest in every game of the regular season? Because there's a different level of play in the playoffs. Mm-hmm. So why don't they play every single regular season game at their highest level? Because you can't. You physically can't. Mentally, you can't. It's impossible to manufacture the urgency of a playoff game. I think that's I shouldn't say tough, because you want first place, you earn first place. But for Montreal, it's the trickiest sort of dynamic to negotiate, is all of these games they've had to play that don't change their status in the playoffs.
Yeah, Dave and I talked about this right off the top of the show. Montreal hasn't played meaningful football in 5 or 6 weeks, and we think could cost them, because last year they had to win every game just to get in, and then they were peaked at the right time, and then they ended up winning the Grey Cup. Total different story this year. You played in the league a long time. You've been covering it even longer. Have you ever, in your memory, when it was announced earlier this week, it almost like it didn't seem right that the Calgary Stampeders are going to have the first pick in the CFL draft because of how they finished that? That is not anything. That is never. Maybe because of a trade scenario they got a first pick, but not because of the record where the Stamps are going to pick number 1 overall. How the mighty have fallen. And, wow.
Yeah, it's totally true. I mean, but this is, this season alone has been so different than past seasons in just there's oftentimes I will try to sell, as a broadcaster of our game, I'll try to sell the parity in the league. And sometimes I'm trying to convince myself that there's more parity, because sometimes there's a team that
there's been some nights, Glenn, you and Dustin Nielsen have been earning your money trying to put some lipstick on that piece of livestock that is below you, because there's been some tough games to call where.
Yeah, exactly. But in this year, if you go back and look at Montreal's wins, if you go back and look at Saskatchewan's wins, and maybe even Saskatchewan's losses, and you look at how their record could be different if the command center doesn't get involved in Ottawa, if the one play happens differently in a home game, like if the field goal kicker if Lowther makes 3 out of 5 instead of misses that one game. So you start to look at how close and how tight these games have been. I think the approach from Montreal, from Jason Maas, and this is not right or wrong, it's just it's different for everybody, but for Jason Maas, he wants his guys to be playing. So that's why Cody Fajardo played half a game last week in Vancouver. He wants them to play, and he wants them to get that feeling back of playing at a high level. Again, though, I think it's counterproductive, because this is my personal opinion, because your mind can't, it's very difficult to get your mind to that level of do or die when you're trying to manufacture it and it's not real. So he's kind of asking them to play with playoff intensity, but he's fighting against really the forces of nature in a lot of ways, like just human nature. So I don't know. I think it's difficult. For me, it's always, like, I'll put it to you this way. If the Bombers win and I'm Corey Mace, Trevor's not playing, neither is A.J. Ouellette, probably not Micah Johnson, maybe even Roland Milligan. Now, I don't know what his approach will be, and again, it's not right or wrong. All I'm saying is the ex-player in me would rather – I would never ask a coach to sit out, but the ex-player in me would much rather be fresh and as healthy as I could be going into a playoff game than to bang it out in a game that doesn't change our playoff fortunes. I'd much rather do that. And, I think a lot of players, if you ask them honestly, once they're done the game, because if they say it when they're in the game, their coach goes, "Oh, you don't want to play? I guess we got the wrong guy."
Ooh.
Like that kind of thing. So, you don't ever say it to a coach. But, everybody's a little banged up now. Everybody's a little banged up. You've got the risk of injury, which can happen at any time. But to me, especially if you don't have the week off for the final, if the Riders are playing in the semifinal, they got it at home, BC Lions are coming to town, wouldn't it help if the guy who covers punts as well as Roland Milligan did, and also plays short side halfback, one of the toughest spots on the field defensively to play, and it has the season? Wouldn't it be nice to give him an extra week so he is 100% fresh in that playoff game? I mean, that's just a personal opinion. Again, not right or wrong. If Corey Mace decides to go in another direction, it's not a criticism. It's just what I would do. And I remember Mark Trestman doing it a ton when he had Calvillo and that group that was winning Grey Cups.
Suits, we're getting up against it. I do want to ask you one more quick question, but before I should mention that's how you and I are athletically different, in the fact that you would ask the coaches to sit down and I was told to sit down. So completely different ends of the spectrum there. But having said that, I'm a firm believer that there's obviously physical and mental preparation for a game, but I think there's emotional preparation as well. And I'm curious if you agree, and if you're a Saskatchewan Roughrider, right, you could be approaching this game with everything on the line, or you could be approaching this as an opportunity to gear up for the playoffs, if you know what I mean. How do you do that emotionally so that you're playing your best come Saturday?
Well, I think you err on the side of getting emotionally ready no matter what happens in the Winnipeg game, and you try to train your mind and be disciplined in your mind to think that way. Again, though, that if they lose fights, or excuse me, if they win, if the Bombers win, that fights against human nature. It's like, I thought it would be interesting to see if Corey Mace is going to allow the team to watch the first game. Or are they is he going to try to just keep their focus on the game that they have to play? And that's real old school way of thinking, because think of it now, guys. Like back in the day, the coach could decide because there'd be one TV in the locker room and he'd either decide to turn it on or not turn it on. And if you didn't have that on, you weren't watching the game. But now the guys can look on their phones. They could be, coach could walk by and they could say, yeah, I'm just texting my wife, coach, thanks. And they're watching the game on their phone, right? So, and by the way, Dave, I wouldn't ever have told the coach to sit me down. I would never have told him. I would be thinking it, but I would never
Hey, listen. If he pulls a hamstring in warm-up, how are they to know that it's not real, all right? All right. So Glen Suitor, you're like, well, wait a minute, it's Thursday, but it's not 5. So Suits was on with us a little today because he is the Loverboy song working for the weekend. He's got a double dip. Toronto, Edmonton tomorrow, and then he's back home here in Sasky on Saturday. He's doing the Rider Stampeder game. Glenn, as always, we appreciate it.